Hello and a very warm welcome to my channel. Step in from the cold, gather close to the fire, and let the world outside fade away. I believe that stories are more than just words. They are journeys we take together, maps to worlds unseen, and hearts unknown. Tonight, we venture into the vast, silent heart of a frozen wilderness. A place of breathtaking beauty and lethal indifference. We'll follow a man not in search of gold or glory, but of an echo, the ghost of a legacy, left behind by a father he barely knew. It's a tale of obsession, survival, and the profound quiet that can only be found at the edge of the world. But before we set out, I have a question for you. What is the furthest you would go, not for a treasure, but for an answer? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy these journeys into the written word, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It means the world to me and helps our small community of story lovers grow. Also, don't forget to tell me what kind of story you'd like to hear next. Fantasy, mystery, history, a ghost story. I'm listening. Now settle in, the wind is rising, and our story is about to begin. Chapter 1. The Edge of All Things. The settlement of Last Hope was aptly named. It clung to the lip of a frozen river like a desperate man to a ledge. A final, splintered outpost of humanity, before the world gave way to an endless white eternity. It was a place built of rough-hewn logs, smoke, and the wary silence of men who had seen too much of the Gilded North's cruel indifference. For most it was a launching point for dreams of gold. For Elias Vance, it was a terminus, the end of a long journey, and the beginning of a pilgrimage into a ghost's footsteps. It was the winter of 1868. The air in Last Hope was so cold, it felt solid, a physical weight in the lungs. Each breath was a measured, painful act. Elias, standing by the frost-rimed window of the trading post, watched his own vapor cloud and vanish. He was a man of 30, though the harsh northern light and the gravity of his purpose had etched lines of a decade more around his eyes. He was not built like the other men here, the broad-shouldered trappers and prospectors with hands like cured leather. He was lean, his movements precise and economical, the way a draftsman's hand moves across paper. His tools were not the pickaxe and pan, but the theodolite, the chronometer, and the compass. He was a cartographer, a man who sought to tame the world by rendering it in ink and line. This world, however, resisted taming. The Gilded North, as the papers in Boston and New York called it, was a lie. There was no gold here, not for most. There was only cold, snow, and a silence so profound it could drive a man mad. Elias knew this. He had not come for wealth, he had come for his father, or rather for the ghost of his father. Alistair Vance had vanished into this white expanse 10 years ago, leading a survey expedition to map the unmappable heart of the territory. He had been chasing a myth, a place on no chart, whispered about by the native tribes. The anima loci, the spirit of the place, or as his journal called it, the heart of the mountain. Alistair's expedition was declared lost, swallowed by an early blizzard. But for Elias, his father had not simply disappeared, he had become a part of the landscape itself, a geographical anomaly to be found and charted. Elias's inheritance had not been land or money, but a heavy, sea-worn chest containing his father's life's work. Maps, star charts, and the final, leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with Alistair's precise, slanted script, detailing observations of flora and fauna, meteorological data, and increasingly fervent, almost mystical descriptions of the heart of the mountain. It was this journal that was Elias's guide, his Bible, and his burden. Another fool for the white, a gruff voice rumbled from behind him. Elias turned. The speaker was Silas Croft, the proprietor of the trading post. He was a mountain of a man, clad in bearskin, with a beard so thick with ice it seemed a part of the permafrost. His eyes, small and dark, held the flat, knowing look of one who had outlived countless northern winters and the countless men who had underestimated them. "I'm not a prospector," Elias replied, his voice quiet but firm. "Doesn't matter what you call yourself," Silas grunted, polishing a long rifle with an oiled rag. "The North doesn't ask, it just takes. Saw it with your father." The name landed in the quiet room with a thud. Elias felt a familiar tightening in his chest. "You knew of him, saw him off. Same look in his eye you've got, like you're seeing something past the horizon that ain't there. He was a map maker too. Told me he was going to put God's own fingerprint on paper." Silas shook his head slowly. "The North has a way of erasing fingerprint." Elias did not argue. He had heard the warnings in every town and outpost on his journey north. He was chasing a decade-old ghost into a land that devoured men whole. They saw obsession in his eyes, but they did not see the meticulous planning, the years spent studying his father's notes, learning the skills of survival he would need. He had purchased the finest gear, a caribou hide, anorak, sealskin boots, lined with felt, snowshoes of ash and gut, and a sled packed with enough pemmican, dried fish and tea to last for months. "I am prepared," Elias stated, more to himself than to the old trapper. Silas gave a short, harsh laugh that sounded like rockfall. "No one's prepared, you can only be lucky. Your father, he ran out of luck. He went chasing a story the Ingolek people tell their children to keep them from wandering too far. A warm valley in the heart of the ice, a cave of singing crystals, fairy tales. He was a man of science, of observation," Elias defended, his hand instinctively going to the breast pocket of his coat, where the journal was tucked. "Science is a thin coat in a blizzard, boy. He got the fever, same as any prospector. His gold was just a different color." Silas set the rifle down and leaned on the counter, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "I told him the same thing I'm telling you. The Whispering Peaks, they don't like visitors. The wind there, it talks, and it doesn't say anything you want to hear. The Whispering Peaks." The name was circled in his father's journal, the gateway to the final, uncharted leg of his journey. It was there that the last of Alistair's coherent entries had been written. Elias simply nodded, pulling out a small pouch of coins. "I need one more compass, a good one, and a box of waterproof matches." Silas procured the items, his movements slow and deliberate. As he handed them over, his calloused fingers brushed Elias. "The sun is low in the sky this time of year. Days are short, shadows are long, and not all of them are cast by the mountains." The cryptic warning hung in the air as Elias took his supplies and retreated to his small rented room at the back of the post. The room was barely larger than a closet, with a single cot and a small stove that fought a losing battle against the encroaching cold. He laid out his map on the small rickety table. It was a copy of the official territorial survey, but overlaid with his own fine, spidery lines, the routes and landmarks transcribed from his father's journal. His father's path was a hesitant, questing line that ended abruptly at the base of a vast, unnamed massif he had labeled the Whispering Peaks. Elias opened the journal. The ink was faded, the pages brittle. He turned to the last entry dated October. "The air grows thin but my spirit soars. We have reached the foothills of the peaks. The Ingolek guide, Tikani, has left us. He would go no further, speaking of ancestral spirits, and a wind that steals the voices of men. I paid him and let him go. His fear is a primitive thing, a superstition that has no place in the light of discovery. The readings are extraordinary. The magnetic deviation is unlike anything I have ever recorded. It is as if the mountain itself has a will, a polarity all its own. The men are nervous, but I have promised them a discovery that will etch their names into history. Tomorrow we enter the pass. Tomorrow we find the heart." The entry ended there. The rest of the page was blank. 10 years of blank pages followed. Elias closed the superstition or not, Tikani had survived. His father and his entire expedition had not. But Elias saw not madness in those last words, but conviction. A conviction he now shared. He was not here to repeat his father's mistakes, but to complete his work, to draw the final lines on the map, to fill in the blank space that had haunted him for a decade. He would find the heart of the mountain, or he would find his father's bones. Perhaps, he thought with a grim sense of finality, they were one and the same. He would leave at first light. The Gilded North was waiting.
Chapter 2. The White Silence. The first day was a baptism of light and cold. Elias left Last Hope, before the sun had fully breached the horizon. A lone, dark figure, pulling a sled across a landscape of impossible, incandescent white. The settlement vanished behind him in minutes, swallowed by the sheer scale of the wilderness. There was no sound but the rhythmic crunch-swish of his snowshoes on the powder, and the rasp of his own breathing, which plumed before him in a thick, crystalline cloud. The sun, when it came, was a pale, golden disk that offered brilliance but no warmth. It transformed the world into a canvas of dazzling light and sharp, elongated blue shadows. The snow-laden branches of the spruce and fir trees sparkled as if encrusted with diamond. It was a beauty so profound, so absolute, it was terrifying. It was the beauty of a perfectly crafted weapon, a flawless, indifferent thing. Elias understood how a man could be mesmerized by it, lured into a false sense of peace before the cold sank its teeth into him. He kept a relentless pace, guided by his compass and the landmarks his father had so meticulously described. A stand of 5 ancient, gnarled birch trees, like skeletal hands, reaching for the sky. He saw them on the 3rd hour, exactly as described. A ridge of black rock that cuts through the snow like the spine of a buried beast. He crested it at midday. Following his father's path felt like a conversation across time. Each landmark confirmed was a whisper from the past, an assurance that he was on the right track. He made camp as the light began to fail, the sky bleeding into soft hues of lavender and rose. The process was a ritual he had practiced until it was second nature. He built a snow wall as a windbreak, set up his small canvas tent, and lit his alcohol stove. The small blue flame was a fragile miracle of warmth and life in the vast, encroaching twilight. He melted snow for tea, the hot, sweet liquid a shock of life to his chilled core. As he ate his dry, dense pemmican, he sat in the opening of his tent and watched the stars emerge. Here, far from the gaslights of the city, the night sky was a revelation. The Milky Way was not a faint smear but a thick, luminous river of light, so bright it cast a soft, ethereal glow upon the snow. The stars were not distant points but sharp, brilliant diamonds, scattered on black velvet. And then, the true wonder began. A faint green curtain wavered on the northern horizon, then grew, swelling into a vast, shimmering aurora. Ribbons of emerald and violet light danced across the heavens, silent, majestic, and otherworldly. Elias had read of the aurora borealis, had seen it in illustrations, but nothing could prepare him for the sheer, humbling grandeur of it. He felt an ache in his chest, a mix of awe and a profound, crushing loneliness. It was a sight his father must have seen. He wondered if Alistair had felt this same smallness, this same sense of being a fleeting insignificant witness to cosmic majesty. He retreated into his tent and sleeping bag, the journal open on his chest. He read not the final entries, but the earlier ones, written when the expedition was still full of hope. June 5, 1850. The bounty of this land is staggering. We have documented 3 new species of alpine flower, and a subspecies of marmot with unique silver marking. The men are in high spirits. Young Hemlock, my geologist, believes the rock strata suggest immense mineral wealth, but I have urged him to focus on our primary objective. The wealth we seek is one of knowledge, of filling the blank spaces on the map of human understanding. Elias felt a pang of connection to this younger, more optimistic version of his father, a man driven by pure, unadulterated curiosity. When had that purity curdled into the obsession that Silas Croft had described? The next days bled into one another, a grueling routine of walking, navigating and surviving. The initial beauty of the landscape became a monotonous, hypnotic sea of white. The silence was no longer peaceful, it was a presence, a weight that pressed in on him. He began to talk to himself, narrating his actions, just to hear a human voice. On the 5th day, the weather turned. The sky, which had been a brilliant, cloudless blue, became a flat, oppressive sheet of grey. The wind picked up, a low moan, that grew into a piercing shriek. Snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a blinding, horizontal torrent. He was caught in a whiteout. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He could not see more than a few feet in any direction. The world was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of white. To continue was to risk walking in circles, or worse, over the edge of a ravine. To stop was to risk freezing. He remembered his father's journal entry on blizzards. The storm is not an enemy to be fought, but a force to be endured. One must become like a stone, unmoving, patient, until it passes. Elias forced his panic down. He unstrapped his snow shovel from the sled and began to dig. He dug frantically, a desperate burrowing animal, carving a trench into a deep snowdrift. Once it was long enough for his body and deep enough to be below the main force of the wind, he pulled his sled in after him, covered the opening with his tent canvas, and crawled into his sleeping bag. The world was reduced to a suffocating darkness, and the unholy roar of the wind. The snow piled up on his makeshift shelter, insulating him but also threatening to entomb him. He lay there, a man buried alive, and for the first time, a sliver of true doubt entered his heart. The men in Last Hope were right. This was madness. He was chasing a ghost into a tomb of his own making. He did not know how long he lay there. Time ceased to have meaning. It could have been hours. It could have been days. He ate his pemmican cold melted snow in a cup using only the heat of his hand. He drifted in and out of a fitful, cold-soaked sleep, his dreams filled with swirling snow and his father's fading voice. And then, as abruptly as it began, it stopped. The roaring of the wind subsided, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. Elias pushed at the canvas above him. It was heavy with snow. He dug his way out, emerging into a transformed world. The sun was out, blindingly bright. The landscape was new, all sharp edges softened, all tracks erased, buried under a thick, pristine blanket of fresh powder. It was a world reborn, clear. As Elias stood there blinking in the brilliant light, his body aching with cold and stiffness, he felt not despair but a strange sense of renewal. He had faced the North's fury and survived. He had become the stone. As his eyes adjusted, he saw something in the distance, something the blizzard had uncovered, a dark shape, stark against the new snow. It was half buried, sticking out of a drift at an unnatural angle. With a surge of adrenaline, he strapped on his snowshoes and made his way towards it. It was a sled, a heavy, old-fashioned freight sled, its wood weathered gray and splintered. It was much larger than his own, and on its side, faded but still visible, was stenciled the name Vance, Expedition, BSS, 1858. His heart hammered against his ribs. He had found it. He had found the first real trace. He fell to his knees and began to dig frantically with his bare hands, the cold forgotten. He unearthed a broken crate, a rusted pickaxe, and then a small, leather-bound book, frozen solid. He recognized the shape. It was a geologist's field log. He chipped the ice away carefully. On the inside cover, in elegant script, was the name, Thomas Hemlock, geologist. He had found not a ghost but a grave marker. The blizzard had not been a trial but a guide, peeling back a decade of snow to show him the way. His doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. He was closer than ever. He packed the logbook carefully, a relic from a lost world, and looked towards the jagged, formidable peaks that now loomed on the horizon. The whispering peaks. His father's voice seemed to whisper on the clean, cold wind, no longer a fading echo, but a clear, urgent call.
Chapter 3. The Whispering Peaks. The approach to the Whispering Peaks was a slow, arduous ascent from the rolling foothills into a realm of rock, ice, and sky. The friendly spruce and fir forests thinned, giving way to stunted, wind-twisted pines that clung to the stony ground like desperate supplicants. The scale of the mountains was difficult to comprehend. They were not mere peaks, but a colossal wall of granite and glacier that scraped the heavens. Elias felt like an ant crawling towards a cathedral. The name, he soon discovered, was no fanciful invention. The wind, funneled through the jagged spires and narrow passes, created a constant, eerie music. It was not a simple roar or a whistle, but a complex, polyphonic sound that seemed to rise and fall in cadence, like a choir of ghostly voices. At times it sounded like a mournful sigh, at others a sharp, sibilant whisper that seemed to slither just at the edge of hearing. It was deeply unsettling. The sound wormed its way into his thoughts, making the silence in his own mind feel fragile and temporary. He understood now why Tikani, the Ingalic guide, had fled. It felt as if the mountains themselves were speaking, and their language was one of warning. His father's journal had noted the strange magnetic deviations, and Elias's own compass now confirmed it. The needle trembled, refusing to settle, swinging lazily, as if confused. He was forced to navigate by the sun and stars, and by the detailed sketches in Alistair's journal. It was a slower, more demanding form of cartography, one that relied on instinct and observation as much as on instruments. He found the pass his father had described, a narrow, treacherous cleft between two towering spires of black rock. The entrance was choked with snow and ice, and a fall of rock had blocked the path Alistair had likely taken. Elias had to find another way, a steep, dangerous climb up a frozen cascade of ice that clung to the rock face. It took him an entire day, chipping handholds and footholds with his small axe, his muscles screaming in protest, the sled a dead weight he had to haul up inch by painstaking in. The whispering wind seemed to mock his efforts, plucking at his clothes and trying to tear him from his precarious perch. Once through the pass, he entered a different world. It was a high-altitude labyrinth of shadowed canyons and wind-scoured ridges. The sun, even at midday, was a fleeting visitor, its warm light unable to penetrate the deep gloom of the ravines. The cold here was more profound, a dry, biting cold that seemed to leach the life from everything it touched. It was in one of these canyons, sheltered from the incessant wind, that he found the second camp. It was not a single sled, but the remains of the main expedition base.
3 canvas tents, shredded by a decade of wind and weather, clung to their broken frames like skeletal remains. Rusted equipment, shovels, pans, a shattered theodolite, identical to Elias's own, lay scattered and half buried in the snow. It was a scene of sudden desperate abandonment. He felt he was walking through a graveyard. He moved through the camp with a sense of reverence and dread. In the largest tent, which must have been his father's, he found a small, collapsible writing desk, overturned. Beneath it, protected from the worst of the elements, was a tin box. His fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the frozen latch. Inside, packed in oilcloth, were several completed map segments and a star chart, and beneath them, something else. A small, intricately carved wooden bird, an Arctic tern, clearly of Ingallic craftsmanship. A gift perhaps from the guide who had abandoned them. Why had his father kept it? He explored the other tents. In one he found a stack of frozen, unopened letters, tied with a ribbon. A man's correspondence to a wife or sweetheart he would never see again. The intimate, mundane tragedy of it struck Elias harder than the sight of the broken equipment. These were not just names in a journal. They were men with lives, with loves, with futures that had ended here, in this frozen, forgotten place. But there were no bodies, no graves. It was as if the men had simply walked away from their camp and vanished into the whispering air. That night, Elias made his own camp amidst the ruins of his father's. The ghosts of the lost expedition felt palpably close. The wind's whispers seemed to form words, fragments of names, snatches of forgotten conversation. He huddled by his small stove, reading the geologist's logbook he'd found by the sled. Himlock's entries began with scientific zeal, describing the unique crystalline structure of the rock, the unusual metallic veins, but as they neared the peaks, his tone shifted. October, the compass is useless. Vance insists we press on, guided by his charts, but the men are uneasy. The constant noise, it wears on the nerves. 2 of the porters claim to see figures moving on the ridges at dusk. Vance dismisses it as fatigue, tricks of the light. October 11, another argument with Vance. I presented my findings. The rock here is not merely magnetic. It seems to absorb and distort sound in a way I cannot explain. The whispering is a natural acoustic phenomenon, amplified by the canyons, but he will not hear it. He is consumed by his heart of the mountain. He speaks of it as if it were a living thing. I fear his ambition has clouded his judgment. I have advised a retreat until spring. He called it cowardice. The last entry was hurried, frantic. October 12th, an avalanche in the pass behind us. We are trapped. The sound was unnatural, not a rumble, but a shriek. Vance is gone. He took a single sled and went on ahead before dawn, said he was on the cusp of it and would not be delayed. The rest of us, we have to try and climb out to the west. God help us. Elias's blood ran cold. The story was piecing itself together. An avalanche had sealed their retreat. His father, in the grip of his obsession, had abandoned his men, pressing on alone. The others, led by Hemlock, had tried to escape over another pass, and had likely perished in the attempt. His father had not been the leader of a lost expedition. He was its sole self-serving survivor, at least for a time. The image of his father as a heroic explorer shattered, replaced by that of a man so consumed by his goal, that he would leave his men to die. The thought was a bitter poison. Was this the man whose legacy he was trying to honor, or was he just as mad, following the same selfish path into oblivion? The wind howled outside, and Elias could almost hear the accusations in its voice. He looked at the wooden bird in his hand, a symbol of guidance, of a safe way home, a path his father had chosen to ignore. He slept poorly, his dreams a maelstrom of wind, snow, and the accusing faces of the men his father had left behind. He awoke in the grey pre-dawn light, with a new harder resolve. He was no longer just searching for an answer, or a location. He was searching for a judgment. He needed to see the place that had driven his father to such desperate, damnable lengths. He had to know if the discovery was worth the price that had been paid. He left the ruined camp behind, taking only the tin box of maps and the small wooden bird. He pushed deeper into the peaks, following the faint decade-old trail of a single, determined man. The whispers of the mountains seemed to follow him, no longer just a warning, but a lament for the dead.
Chapter 4, The Sunken Valley. Beyond the abandoned camp, the landscape grew stranger still. Elias descended from the high, wind-blasted ridges into a series of interconnected valleys that seemed to burrow into the heart of the mountain range. The air grew still, the constant whispering of the peaks fading to a distant murmur. A strange, sulphurous smell tainted the cold, and plumes of white vapor rose from fissures in the rock, creating a perpetual, shifting mist that clung to the valley floor. He was entering a geothermal zone, an oasis of geologic activity in the frozen world. The snow thinned, revealing dark, damp earth and patches of bizarre, resilient moss that glowed with a faint, phosphorescent green in the gloom. The warmth was minimal, but enough to create an ecosystem entirely different from the sterile ice world above. It was a sunken, secret land, hidden from the sky. His father's journal had described this place with breathless wonder. I have descended into the mountain's veins. It is alive. The rock breathes steam, the ground is warm to the touch. This is the path, I am certain of it. The laws of the surface world no longer apply here. Elias followed a half-frozen stream whose water was strangely warm. The mist swirled around him, playing tricks with distance and shape. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the howling ridges. Here, the only sound was the gurgle of the stream and the soft hiss of the steam vents. It was this unnatural quiet that allowed him to hear the sound, a low, pained groan. He froze, his hand immediately going to the small pistol he carried, but had never used. He scanned the misty landscape, his heart pounding. The sound came again, closer this time, a deep, guttural sound of suffering. It was not human. He moved forward cautiously, his snowshoes sinking into the soft, mossy earth. Through a thick curtain of mist he saw it. A great bull moose, one of the largest he had ever seen, was trapped. Its massive antlers were hopelessly entangled in a thicket of strange, thorny, vine-like growths that thrived in the geothermal heat. In its struggle, it had gored its own side on a sharp rock, and a dark stain was spreading across its brown flank. Its eyes, wide with pain and terror, rolled to fix on Elias. It let out another agonized bellow. Elias knew he should retreat. A wounded moose was one of the most dangerous creatures in the north, but he couldn't. He saw in its predicament a reflection of his own journey, of his father's ensnared by a strange and unforgiving landscape, struggling until the bloody end. Slowly, carefully, he unslung his axe. He spoke in a low, calm voice, the way one might soothe a frightened horse. Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you, easy. The moose watched his every move, its great chest heaving. It was too weak to charge. Elias moved to the side, away from the dangerous antlers, and began to hack at the thick, woody vines. The work was hard, the vines unnaturally tough. The moose flinched with every blow, groaning in fear. It took nearly an hour, sweat freezing on his brow, despite the valley's relative warmth. Finally, with a loud crack, the last of the restraining vines snapped. The moose staggered, shaking its magnificent head to fully free its antler. It stood there for a long moment, trembling, its gaze fixed on Elias. There was no aggression in its eyes now, only a kind of weary primal understanding. Then, with a quiet grunt, it turned and limped away, vanishing into the mist as silently as it had appeared. Elias leaned on his axe, his body shaking from adrenaline and exertion. The act of mercy, of freeing the trapped animal, felt like a cleansing. It was a choice for life in a place so defined by death. It was a choice he suspected his father, in his final days, would not have made. Pressing on, he felt a change within himself. The hardness, the judgment he had felt in the ruined camp, began to soften. He was not his father. He did not have to be. Late that afternoon, he found what he had been searching for. Tucked under a massive rock overhang, sheltered from the elements, was the final camp. It was just a single sled, his father's sled, and the remains of a small, long-dead fire, and next to it, a bedroll of furs and a human form. Elias's breath caught in his throat. He approached slowly, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. It was his father. He was laid out peacefully, as if sleeping. The dry, cold air of the valley had preserved him, mummifying him rather than letting him decay. His face was thin and gaunt, his beard long and streaked with grey, but he was instantly recognizable from the old photographs. Alistair Vance. He had not died in a blizzard or fallen from a cliff. He had simply lain down here, at the end of his strength, and let the cold take him. Beside the body, resting on a flat stone, was the journal. It was open, a final entry scrawled in a weak, unsteady hand. Elias knelt, his legs suddenly unable to support him, and read the last words his father ever wrote. I have seen, not the cave of legends, not the jewels the stories promised, something else, a truth. The Ingolek were right. It is a spirit, a place of power, but the mountain does not give up its heart easily. It asks for everything. My strength is gone, the journey back is impossible. I do not regret. To map a place is to know it,
and to know this place is to know the face of God. I have left the final charts under the stone. I hope one day, a son of my own blood might find them. Elias, I hope you choose to map the world of men, not these lonely, beautiful, terrible places. It is a better map to make. I am so very cold now, but the light is beautiful. Tears streamed down Elias's face, freezing on his cheeks. All his anger, his judgment, his bitterness, dissolved into a profound, aching sorrow. His father had not abandoned his men out of malice, but out of a sublime, all-consuming awe. He had not found treasure, but a kind of religious transcendence, and in his final moments, his thoughts had been of his son. Elias reached out a trembling hand, and gently closed his father's eye. He sat there for a long time as the mist swirled around them, father and son reunited at last, in the silent, sunken heart of the Gilded North. He had found his ghost, now he had to see what his father had seen. He had to find the light.
Chapter 5. The Heart of the Mountain. Following the final, simple map his father had left under the stone. A sketch on a piece of tanned caribou hide. Elias made his way from the sheltered overhang, deeper into the valley. The geothermal activity grew more pronounced. The ground became a tapestry of vibrant, heat-loving mosses in shades of deep green, rust red, and electric blue. The air was thick with the smell of sulfur and wet earth, a primal scent of a world in the making. The map led him to the base of a sheer cliff face, hidden behind a grove of petrified, ancient trees that looked like stone sculptures. Here, shrouded in a constant curtain of steam, rising from a fissure at its base, was a dark opening, the mouth of a cave. It was not large, barely tall enough for a man to enter without stooping. This was it. Lighting his lantern, its warm yellow glow a stark contrast to the cool, phosphorescent light of the mosses outside. Elias took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold. He was not entering a place of rock and dirt, but one of crystal and light. The cave was a geode of unimaginable scale. The walls, the ceiling, the floor, everything was coated in a thick, crystalline growth. They were not diamonds or quartz, but something else entirely, a mineral that seemed to have captured the aurora from the sky. They pulsed with a soft internal luminescence, a gentle, shifting light of their own in hues of green, blue and violet. As he walked deeper, the passage opened into a vast cathedral-like cavern. The air here was warm and humid. In the center of the cavern, a huge, perfectly formed crystal, the size of a small house, rose from the floor. It was the heart of the mountain. From a massive fissure in the cavern's ceiling, hundreds of feet above, a single brilliant shaft of sunlight lanced down, striking the central crystal. The effect was breathtaking. The great crystal acted as a prism, catching the sunlight and shattering it into 1,000 beams of pure, liquid color that danced and painted the walls of the cavern. The entire space was filled with a silent, moving symphony of light. The gentle, internal glow of the smaller crystals on the walls answered the brilliant projection from the central stone, creating a display of such sublime, overwhelming beauty that Elias fell to his knees. This was what his father had seen. This was the light from his final journal entry. It was not gold or jewels. It was not a treasure to be plundered. It was a natural temple, a place of pure, unadulterated wonder, a place that made a man's life, his ambitions, his maps, seem infinitesimally small. It was God's fingerprint, just as Alistair had said. Elias extinguished his lantern. The artificial light was a vulgar intrusion. He sat in the warm-colored twilight of the cavern for hours, simply watching the light shift and play as the sun moved across the sky, far above. The whispers of the peaks, the harshness of the cold, the ghosts of the lost expedition, it all faded away, replaced by a profound, all-encompassing peace. He understood his father's obsession now. To discover a place like this was to be fundamentally, irrevocably changed. How could one return to the mundane world of men after witnessing such a thing? His father had made a choice to give his life to the mountain, to become a part of its silent majesty. Elias knew he had to make a different choice. He took out his own surveying equipment. With a sense of sacred duty, he began to work. He measured the cavern's dimensions, noted the angle of the sun through the fissure, sketched the formation of the great crystal. He was not a conqueror claiming a discovery, but a humble scribe, recording a miracle. He worked with the meticulous precision that was his gift, his own form of worship. He was completing his father's work, not by dying for it, but by understanding it, documenting it, and most importantly, by choosing to live beyond it. When his work was done, he took out the small carved wooden tern he had found in his father's tent. He walked to the base of the great crystal, and placed the bird gently upon a small natural shelf in the glowing rock. It was a symbol of guidance, of a journey's end,
a final offering to the spirit of the place, and a tribute to the man who had led him here. He did not take a single crystal shard. The thought was a sacrilege. The treasure of this place was not in its substance, but in its existence. Its value lay in its secrecy, its untouched perfection. This map would not be published. This discovery would not be shared with a world that would only seek to exploit and destroy it. It was a secret he would share only with his father. Chapter 6. The Cartographer's Return. Before leaving the valley, Elias returned to his father's final resting place. Using stones from the hillside, he built a simple, sturdy cairn over the body. A silent, dignified monument against the passage of time. He said no prayer, offered no eulogy. The silence of the valley was a more fitting tribute than any words he could offer. He placed his father's journal inside the cairn. A final piece of the man, returned to the landscape he so loved. The map had been made, the story finished. It was time for the book to be closed. The journey back was different. The Gilded North had not changed. It was just as cold, just as vast, just as unforgiving. But Elias had changed. He moved with a new sense of purpose, a quiet confidence that had replaced the feverish obsession. He was no longer chasing a ghost. He was carrying a memory. The landmarks he passed were not just points on a map, but stations in a pilgrimage he had completed. The whispering peaks seemed less menacing on his return. He heard not threats in the wind, but a solemn, eternal song. He navigated the treacherous passes with a patient skill, his body hardened by the journey, his spirit settled. When he finally saw the plumes of smoke rising from Last Hope, he felt not a sense of triumph, but of a quiet, profound relief. He was a different man from the one who had walked out of that settlement months ago. The lean, haunted cartographer had been scoured by the wind and ice, and what was left was calmer, stronger. He walked into Silas Croft's trading post, the bell above the door jangling softly. The old trapper looked up from his counter, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. He had clearly not expected to see Elias again. "So, the white didn't take you," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. It was as close to a warm welcome as he was capable of. "Not this time," Elias replied, his voice raspy from disuse. He unslung his pack and placed it on the floor. He felt 100 years older. Silas looked him over, his gaze sharp and appraising. "You found something out there. I can see it in your eyes. It wasn't gold." "No," Elias said quietly. "It wasn't gold." He did not tell Silas about the cavern, about the light, about his father's final resting place. He knew the old man would not understand, or worse, would not believe him. Some secrets, like some places on a map, were meant to remain blank. They were what gave the world its mystery, its soul. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Silas asked, his curiosity finally getting the better of his gruff exterior. "Your father?" Elias paused, looking out the frosted window at the endless white expanse he had just crossed. He thought of the cairn in the misty valley, of the wooden bird resting at the base of the great crystal. "Yes," he said, a small sad smile touching his lips for the first time in a decade. "I found him." He finished his map. And so, he knew, had he. His map was not of a place but of a life. It was a map that showed the treacherous journey from obsession to understanding. From the ghost of a legacy to the quiet peace of his own 2 feet on the ground. He had gone to the edge of the world to find his father, and in the end he had found himself. The Gilded North had taken much, but it had given him back a truth that was more precious than any discovery. It had taught him the difference between a line on a page and a life truly lived. And that was a map worth making,